Welcome, everyone. I'm Sue Barber, author, former IT director for a Fortune 500 company, turned executive coach, and this is the Visibility Factor podcast, where we explore how to raise your visibility and play bigger at work and in life. We'll explore key topics and welcome guests that help you shift your thinking about yourself so you can see new possibilities for your leadership. I'm on a mission to create a visibility movement for leaders to show their value and be seen for their true talent. Are you ready to take the next step towards a higher level of visibility for yourself? Let's go. Today's episode of the Visibility Factor podcast is brought to you by Amplify You, the ultimate program designed to unleash your full potential and amplify your success. Imagine having a personal coach cheering you on, guiding you through a journey of self-discovery, and helping you break free from those limiting beliefs that have been holding you back. That's exactly what Amplify You is all about. Whether you're a leader now or aspiring to be one, this program is your ticket to a more confident, empowered you. It's like having a supportive friend in your corner, encouraging you to dream big. It's about having the career success that you want and creating a life you truly deserve. Amplify You offers a unique experience to help you build the confidence to tackle any challenge life throws your way. If you're interested in learning more about the program, please visit susanmbarber.com and click on the menu item Programs. Are you ready to transform your life and your career? Let's make it happen. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Visibility Factor podcast. This is Sue Barber, your host. Today, I am thrilled to bring you my guest, Dr. Carrie Niederman. And I met Dr. Carrie Niederman in my group for my books, and she is part of the top 3 community. And you guys have all heard some amazing authors who are part of that community. And she's working on a book, and she's going to be talking about something that might be a little different than our normal guests, but I think it's really an important topic. And it does have to do with visibility and how people can still be visible even when maybe you don't think that there's anything going on with them. They might have something going on that you need to be aware of. And I think that can happen for everybody. We're all dealing with different things. And I love what Dr. Carrie has to share. And I really am excited for her to do that with you. So thank you for joining the show today. I'm thrilled to have you.
Thanks. Thrilled to be here as well.
Excellent. Well, I'm just going to read your bio real quick and then have you add on anything else that you might want to share. Dr. Carrie Niederman is an educator, speaker, entrepreneur, and equine veterinarian-turned-consultant, changing the narrative for people who fall outside the lines of conventional medical diagnosis and treatments for certain chronic long-term conditions. She leverages her medical background as a clinical veterinarian, journey with a chronic invisible illness, and the Disney Cinderella fairy tale to bring to life the stop and start journey these individuals are on so they can be seen. Carrie's goal is to create a path for physicians, employers, and friends and family members to partner for effective long-term care, accommodation, and empathy. I am so excited to have this conversation. You and I spoke a few weeks ago, and I think it's just a topic that a lot of people don't know enough about. And I think anyone with chronic illnesses is obviously living and experiencing that. But for those who aren't, it feels, I don't know, maybe confusing, uncertain. They don't understand enough to be able to be helpful. And so I'm hoping today that you can share some things that might help other people who are trying to help those people who are dealing with those situations, but also even for the people who are having the chronic illnesses to learn how to use their voice, right? Be able to speak up and ask for what they need. So I would love to just start with a few questions here. We have gone back and forth on some questions because I want to be very sure that we're asking the right things here and talking about the right topics. And is there anything else you want to add before I get into questions?
No, I appreciate it. I know when we spoke, as you said in your intro, that this is a different topic about visibility than what you're normally, or the other podcast that I've listened to. But it struck me that the word was magic to me. I was like, okay, this is it. This is the visibility factor that I wish for. And all of us with invisible conditions, we wish to be visible and want that. Mm-hmm. And I think that creating narratives and that conversation is so important, because then there are some subtle visible symptoms that I do show that we'll talk about, and it just takes time to see them. And I know we're in a very busy world, and that is hard to capture. and then things get misunderstood.
100%. Yes. Okay. So before we get into some of those things, I watched an amazing video on your website about you being a mobile veterinarian. And I would love for you to share a little bit about what a day in the life looked like for you as you were doing that. Because I know you've since retired, but I think it would be interesting for people who maybe have never been a part of that experience, what that's like for you.
Well, yes, I'll say that video was taken at 8:00 in the morning, and we did one take, and I had no idea it just went beautifully. So I was very grateful for that. But I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. I was one of those probably women. I mean, I loved horses, but I don't have the gene that I needed to own a horse, but I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian for a long time. And I knew when I was in veterinary school that I wanted to work on large animals. So that divide happened then. And then I was really lucky to come across two wonderful mentors who introduced me to the world of the horse's mouth and equine dentistry, and found this niche of availability for clients. And I went on the road. And it was a magical, fun day. So each day, the timing was, you talk about business and it's all about timing and luck, and got this niche and had these great clients, and I could arrive. Being mobile, you get to know people in a different way. And so I arrived and be able to have conversations about all of the patients were loved ones. They were members of the family. They weren't just a means to an end. So it was a very different dialogue, even though my patients, the four-legged patients, were ranges of they had jobs. Most of them were doing dressage for their sort of activity. But I also had horses that the parents had bought for their daughter, most likely. And that daughter is now grown and left the house. And that horse is now living into his 20s and 30s and is still there and needs dental care and or dietary recommendations as they lose their teeth, as they do normally. So it was a great run. I had a great dog that was my companion and my assistant, and he got to know everybody, and really had 20, 25, almost 30 years of a great life on the road. So the video really captures that sort of setup and what I use. So I came fully prepared.
Yeah, I mean, you had everything you could possibly need, which is, I think, different than a lot of people would have expected, right? They might see Dr. Pol on TV and think, it's kind of like the right. Dr. Pol experience, right? But you had everything to do surgery and everything to put, the horse in to something so you would stay safe as well, which, I don't know, it was just kind of fascinating to me how you did that. And of course that has to happen. I just had never seen it.
Right. And I think the world of having a mobile stock was unique, but one of my mentors developed that stock. And I quickly realized that was going to provide a nice, safe, repeatable place for me to work from. That's why it's advantageous to be able to work on horses at a clinic, because then the veterinarian you have the variable is the horse, but if everything else is the same, then you can concentrate on the horse. And I could reproduce that at barnside because I brought everything with me. And I got used to backing up and doing all of that. Yeah. So I was well known on the road. I was very recognizable on the road. Yeah.
I bet.
They did. They waved and I didn't have a clue of who it was, but it was fun. It was a great, great job. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's so amazing. Okay. So let's transition into, I think it was about 15 years ago. You one day were driving home and just started to feel like you had the flu, like you weren't feeling well. You didn't really know what it was, just wasn't feeling yourself. Kind of tell me what happened and in that experience for you.
Yeah. So as you just said, it was a regular day. I was on my way home. It was early summer. I worked in Texas. So I think the heat was one thing that I was thinking about as I was driving home, thinking, okay, maybe I've overdone it. It's early in the year. So yeah, sort of classic flu. Felt a little headache, little sore throat. I'm thinking, okay, I'm just don't feel well. Let's just get home and unwind. But by the time I got home and unpacked, then I started feeling a little more a little sicker than just an average flu. And then my legs started to hurt. And that was unusual. And I thought, wow, maybe I did get myself dehydrated and I just need to get to a clinic and get some fluids. So I went to the ER, which was sort of unusual for me. I mean, if it's just a normal illness, I'll just stay at home. So I got to the ER and I was there a few hours, but my legs continued to get more and more painful. But sort of foretelling was that all of my blood work was completely normal. And I did eventually spike a fever, but they said, everything's normal. We just think that you just have a flu and you just need to go home. So by that night, I went home. But by the next morning, I woke up and it was like a page had turned. And I'll describe later, but I describe it as a light switch went off. Something shifted. I felt different. I was like, what happened? And that moment was when I lost a gear of life. There was I didn't know that at that time had sort of switched into the condition of what we now call myalgic encephalomyelitis or ME/CFS. We can call it ME/CFS for simplicity today. But it was then it wasn't just a simple viral infection. Something had changed in my mechanics. And I was quite a runner before then, but that was gone overnight. And there was, as I said, it was just I lost a gear and something happened and I never regained it.
Wow. How long did it take to actually get a diagnosis?
Well, that's a great question because I think back then there isn't a diagnostic test. There isn't a blood test. And it was more of a diagnosis of exclusion. So I basically went through 8 years of trying to pursue something, trying to figure out if there was some blood work that would show up something abnormal. But I never had anything come up abnormal. So I went through a battery of testing thinking that there was something to do with my veterinary degree. So I'd gotten something infectious. So they pursued all of that. We did MRIs of various things of my legs. So my legs I never showed any problems with muscle enzymes or anything that indicated that something was primarily wrong. So really for me was a diagnosis of exclusion over time. I was fatigued long enough that then I sort of fell into that category. Nowadays, they have more defined sort of criteria that then allow it to be something that then isn't such a sort of end on that piece. There is some active sort of saying, okay, if you're fatigued this long, you've got these kind of symptoms, then you get this combination of things, then it's not a diagnosis of exclusion. But I'm not sure I really ever got that sort of diagnosis from anybody, but I figured it out. I was like, I'm tired and this is what I have.
I mean, I'm sure being a veterinarian, you're used to diagnosing and know that there's something that's just not right. Yeah. So I'm sure that helped you kind of keep pushing the conversations and doing more exclusion, as you mentioned, like, this isn't it. It's not this. It's not that. It's no blood work thing is showing up here. So, I would just imagine the frustration of that, though, right? Because we hope we go to a doctor and we get a diagnosis. And in your situation, and I think for many others who are experiencing chronic illnesses, there may not be, a specific diagnostic test that they can do to prove that. So I can imagine that can be frustrating and add to what you're already going through.
It was very frustrating. And I think over those 8 years where I was actively pursuing to get back to my active self, there was starts and stops with that. Initially, I was like, oh, come on, what is this? And I would document everything, have all of my paperwork all sort of organized. And in some ways that was probably overwhelming just because in 10 or 15 minutes, it wasn't just going to be figured out magically. And I knew the longer it went on, Sue, that all of these sort of you heading to a doctor and the top 10 diseases or 15 diseases have all been ruled out by that point. And you know that this is a harder wicket and it's much more likely that something isn't going to be figured out, or that, you're just out of shape, you're just stressed. All of those kind of narratives start to play on you, and then you give up. And I had to be careful, because I think there's also a place where even with my veterinary training, I pursued alternatives that were, a little scary. I didn't want to do harm to myself with anything, but I got caught up on that desperation of wanting to get back to me. But I eventually had to sort of give up. But it was a frustrating process. And I also, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I also understood with the clinician lens, I knew that, as I said, I'm a hard patient to walk in the door, because I don't look sick and the blood work is all normal. And this has been going on a long time. I've seen all of these specialists, and what's new to do? There wasn't some magical thing that hadn't been done at that time. So I understood that frustration. Somebody wanted to help me, but there just wasn't an answer.
Yeah. You're definitely venturing into the unknown a little bit, for sure. So can you describe what you use the term unravel when things are happening for you? Can you share a little bit about what that looks like for you and how that, shows up?
Sure. It's so with this condition, with MECFS, it's one of those, they describe it as the energy limiting. Something's happened in my capacity to store energy. So I never can be, my energy batteries or the mitochondria in my cells can never be fully charged, and they can drain to zero at any moment. And that when that draining happens, I unravel. And I think in this, since we're on a computer, I think the technology is a great example of how that happens. So imagine you're on the gazillion Zoom that you're during a day, and the person is sharing a screen and they're flipping through, let's look at this document, that document. Now I'm having to navigate lots of different screens that are flashing with my brain. I'm having to process this. Our brain uses a lot of energy, and suddenly now I'm starting to not click as quickly. And I'm slowly slowing down, and there is a detachment. So now people talk about this brain fog. There's this sense of, okay, I'm getting less connected with what's going on. I can't keep up. And I start to slow down. And now I really start to get confused. And so there's a transition from being relatively clear to fogginess, to then now you're really getting confused, and then there's an irritability that happens for me. And then I'm like, okay, we got to stop. And then my voice changes. It's so that unraveling, and that can happen pretty quickly depending on whatever it is. So it's either on a Zoom or even, I was filling up my car this morning, and a lot of the gas station pumps have ads. So they talk to you, or there's music playing. All I want to do is be able to fill up my car quietly. And I've got this background noise that's stimulating my body, and my body is having to utilize valuable energy to process that stimuli. And that's too much. So depending on that day, the time of day, I can tolerate that better than others. So that's my unraveling.
That's such a shift from where you were, right? And what you were doing and running, and obviously your practice for veterinary and everything else that you were doing. I know that you told me some situations, right, where they've happened with friends and family, even where it can be a challenge for people to recognize that this unraveling is happening for you. And, once they're closer to you, they can see it. But what have you done to advocate for yourself to help you be able to manage as these things are happening for you?
Yeah, I think it comes from, so much of my veterinary career was educating clients about a part of the horse's anatomy they couldn't see. So I love that. I mean, I really felt like I wanted to teach with a degree, even when I first started once I graduated from veterinary school. And so my inclination is to educate. So I try to say, okay, well, this is what's happening. And the concern is that then I don't want to overload somebody, but it has to be more than, I have chronic fatigue. And they're like, yeah, well, just get some rest. And I'm sorry about that. It's a very different dialogue. And so if you're somebody meaningful in my life, then there's an education. I might send a video or some article saying, would you read this? And then talk about what's happening to me. But it is the hardest part. The most enlightening is for people to be able to see me unravel and see that change. And then they say, oh, wait, that just happened. And so part of it is education. And then the big part for me is to figure out some sort of narrative. And that's where you mentioned in my intro is this introducing the Cinderella story for me was I don't remember when it was that I first sort of said, I'm turning into a pumpkin. But I felt like Cinderella is a well-known fairy tale. And there is this sort of known visual of what happens when the clock strikes midnight during that fairy tale, the book or the movie or whatever version you're watching. And so I started using that as an example to try to bring it to life in a way that wasn't heavy and so scientific, because that's where I lean towards. But then the Cinderella became that description. And some people, they can get it, at least in a light sense. So that's how I started using that narrative.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is hard because you look amazing, right? You look fine. So, what are you talking about? You must be fine. And I think it's also interesting. As you were talking, it made me think about, even in workplace, right? In a corporate workplace, which is a lot of, my audience, knowing that there might be something going on with the people that work for you and trying to ask the right questions, but not impose themselves right into your personal life and all of that. So it's kind of a new world I think we're all embarking upon. There's other people who have long COVID. You mentioned yours is a little different than that, but there is this new thing, right, that I think a lot of people and managers have never had to deal with. And now they have to ask different questions or pay attention or at least understand that there might be something different going on, even though the person looks fine.
Right. And I think that long COVID, which it's similar to MECFS in the sense that there's a shared, in the sort of Venn diagram world of looking at these conditions, that there's the shared energy component, the energy limiting piece where they talk about this post-exertional malaise where you do too much and then you get sicker. And so pushing people, trying to have them plug back into, if you've had COVID and now it's been 6 months or whatever the criteria is, that now you're entering into a stage where it isn't going away. And now this is your new normal, which is, I know it's a buzzword, but it's a tough word to swallow when you've gotten sick with what you think is a routine viral infection. And yes, so I think if I showed up in a wheelchair, then my employer would then say, okay, there are some standard ways to accommodate. But if I can't handle stimuli or I have much more bandwidth in the end of the day, how do we navigate those? How do we negotiate that? Because so much of identity gets caught up in these chronic illnesses where, who are you? Who am I? If I'm not, for me, I'm not a veterinarian anymore. I'm not a runner anymore. I'm not that person anymore. And I was lucky, Sue, because when I got sick, I was the employee and employer. So I dictated my own hours. I knew when I needed to rest. But if I had to answer to somebody, that was going to be harder. So it's twofold. One is that the employer needs to be educated that these are the kinds of things that we might want to do away in the workplace. All of the noise, all of the, how do we run a Zoom where we don't have to scroll so much? What are those things that then can make somebody still functional so that they feel still, they want to contribute. They still want to be that whoever they were before, from a career standpoint.
I have a couple clients who have different types of chronic illnesses or sensitivities. And, one of the things that they were concerned about is changing jobs. Should I mention this? Should I say anything about this? And I said, well, let's go in first and see what it's like, right? Maybe there isn't a concern to have yet until you know that. And then once you're there, I think you do have to say, maybe could I be moved to a different, desk or part of the floor where it's not so crazy and loud, or maybe there's different lighting to help support them. And I think it is just trying to help people learn how to ask for what they need. And I think your point about educating employers about what could we do differently, I think is important. I was really impressed. One of my clients had a person on her staff who was ADHD, which is obviously different than what we're talking about here today. But they do have their own sensitivities and needs. And they actually hired an ADHD coach to come in and educate their management team on how to help support this person on their team and, maybe others in the organization. So I thought that was really great and very forward thinking because, a lot of people struggle with that. And that's more, well-known, more talked about now than it used to be. So hopefully this will start to be something that is, I don't want it to be common for anyone to go through it, but at least talking about it will become more of the norm than it has been up until now.
Definitely. I think that there's just a lot more knowledge about it and ways to minimize it they're not profound, that can be subtle, and they're not going to be so disruptive to your regular rhythm that business as usual can happen, but certain subtle things can go along. I mean, but I think it takes that repetitive sort of action of like, oh, let's do this again and again and again. I mean, I have some great friends who are very sensitive to my needs, but for example, they love watching basketball or football with the sound on. They want the commentary. But that's the part, the commercials and the parts that then I just need it to be quiet. And I'm like, can we mute that? And they're like, oh, wait. And then we mute it for a while and then they forget. And so it's just getting that awareness and having it talked about in a sense where it's another option. It's another ask for employers. But I do feel like there are so many people in that long COVID category that you might have a great employee that you want to keep. Let's try to figure out how they can still do it, because hiring somebody else from scratch may be a bigger lift. And
there's costs involved with that too, right? So you have to, pay for all of that too. But I do think, it's happening so much more now that I do think there's different conversations that probably need to be happening in a bigger way. And not everybody fits in the perfect box anymore. I think it was that way for a long time. People didn't talk about things that were happening to them. They left their families out of conversations and anything else that might be going on in their personal lives. But I think COVID at least opened the door a bit for those conversations to start happening in a different way. So I hope we can, continue to do some things that are the right things for the employees, because they do want to work, right? They do want to contribute and be a part of the organization. They just might have to do it slightly differently. And I loved your example about, if you were in a wheelchair, things would just automatically be seen. And because you're not doing that, people make assumptions, right? So let's try to not make assumptions and at least understand what we're dealing with and what we can do differently.
No, I was just going to say that last year that I broke my wrist. And so suddenly I had something wrong that was visible. That was the first time I'd broken a bone. And it was really startling for me, Sue, to see how quickly people were like, oh, well, this is what I do to get, help me with various things, all these ideas. And I was like, this doesn't happen if I don't have something that's visible. But if you have something that's visible, it's tangible, it's like, oh, I did that too. And it was really a mind shift for me that suddenly this was an awareness of bringing it visible. I wish I could turn purple when I unraveled or something, do something, but I don't. Yeah.
Okay. That would be interesting to see you as purple.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah.
But I totally understand. I mean, isn't it interesting that we need something as a visible, tangible thing to recognize that something's different? So, yeah, I think we just need to shift that paradigm in how we look at things. It would probably be a start. Mm-hmm. You are doing a lot of things to advocate now in this space. So you're doing speaking, you're doing writing. Would you like to share a bit about what that looks like for you and what your outcome looks like for people? Yeah,
I think it really goes back to that. One of the reasons actually that I reached out to you to talk about visibility, because I think that I want there to be understanding. So I think that being understood is a fundamental starting point. So it's friends and family, it's coworkers, it's medical professionals, and trying to figure out a way to have that fundamental starting point, because then there can be partnerships. So I'm hoping that people then have somebody in their lives with whom that then they can share their life or get support. And so I felt that during the 15 years that I've had this condition and having sort of the clinical lens because of my veterinary degree, that I had some sort of a unique narrative. And I wanted to bring this Cinderella more to life and to use that as a way, as we've been talking, to get people to suddenly see their friend or family member differently and say, oh, now I see it. But part of the so that's really the advocacy that I'm working on, is to try to have that awareness. Ultimately, the biggest conversation or the biggest place where I hope to be able to land in awareness is within the medical world, because I think that I know as a clinician, I want to fix somebody. I mean, that's what we're taught in school. That's where you get satisfaction. You want to fix and help somebody. That's why you go into that field to begin with. And that's a fundamental, guttural joy. And so someone like me is really frustrating, as I've sort of said. And I'm hoping that if I can use this, so I use Cinderella in two different ways to try to recognize why. Let me explain. So why this, how somebody in the medical world can see me sick, because I use Cinderella to describe the day I got sick, so that as well as every day in two different ways. So basically, when I describe that sort of light switch going off was when my clock, this clock struck midnight in Cinderella fashion. So I suddenly fled the castle, converted in wearing rags, and I was now standing next to a pumpkin and some mice outside of the castle. That's what happened when I got sick. And I only had one glass slipper. So my goal is to find one glass slipper, and Cinderella gets it within that short period of time in that fairy tale. But for those of us with an invisible illness, then we're trying to figure out how to explain where we are and what's happening to us every day. And as part of the energy piece for me is to explain it that during a day and when I unravel, I feel, in addition to the sort of symptoms that I described to you, I feel like as that's happening, there's an alarm going off inside of me that's now there because of my ME/CFS. And that's my equivalent of that clock striking midnight. And so when the clock strikes midnight, I start to flee. And what I didn't describe when I started to unravel is that I get really anxious. I'm like, if I'm away from home, I need to get home, because I want to unravel in a safe place. And if I'm with people who don't know me, then that's even worse. So there's that urgency. And so then not only does the energy, sort of my energy supply unpredictable, but time is unpredictable for me. I don't know how much time I have in a given day before I unravel. I just can't control that. And so throughout my day, I can say that I'm going to do these. I have this on my to-do list, but I may not get to them because I start that and say, oh, I've hit, my alarm just went off. I better slow down. I better rest. So it's a series of starts and stops. And how I want this to be correlated, or how this applies to my advocacy, is that I know that there's lots of barriers and lots of weights on health professionals' shoulders now that I didn't carry when I was out on the field driving along the road to farms. But I know when I go into an office visit, I go into the office visit because I feel well enough to go. So you're not going to see me sick unless the office visit is long enough and I might unravel. But office visits classically aren't. So the probability of someone being able to help me figure out and see me unravel is very low. So what I'm proposing in some of my speeches and in my writing is to start to say, can we, and I know this is not a simple fix, can there be, for people like me, an alternative path that says, we'll come in for that one office visit and then the rest of them are virtual, so you can start to see me at home when I'm having a bad day. Because then once a clinician sees me, they get it. Then game over. Then it's like, okay, how do we help? You may not be able to fix me and cure me and put me back to where I was, but you can help me navigate life better if you see me. But if you don't see it, it's really difficult. I mean, you read it in the textbook, but you want to see it. And so that's the big part of what I'm trying to have those conversations about.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine any kind of internal illness that they can't see makes it hard for them if there's no blood work, if there's no symptoms that they can see, because they're taught from a science perspective in so many ways. I can only imagine that doing that. Do you think that, or have you had conversations with people that are open to considering doing something like that, or like a teledoc or some other services that do those types of things? Have they started to think about that? Do you know?
I mean, a little bit. I think as I said, there are layers and barriers. I mean, I think insurance is an issue and availability. And so I've had some introductory conversations, but I look forward to, I think one of your questions was about, what would be success. And so success would be for me to be able to have somebody say, oh, okay, let's try this. I mean, I know it's a big ask, but what I'm trying to correlate is that the unpredictable time that I live in, and many, as you said, many people with that sort of chronic relapsing and remitting conditions, is that it goes up and down. Even MS that has a diagnostic test, they have good days and bad days. So being able to see that I have an unpredictable clock and clinicians and everybody else has this linear predictable clock, how do we get those to align so that then there's more valuable information if there isn't that blood test that will tell? So it's been, I think it's a slow marathon for me, but I'm working at it. But it's just, everybody's busy. And so I'm slowly having conversations.
Yeah. Well, we need to keep doing things like this to get you visible and talking about it and educate people. I think your passion for education will serve you well in this space because there's just a lot of unknowns to a lot of people. And I love the Cinderella aspect. I have Cinderella in my book, and so she's very popular.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Very popular. Well, I will share your website and information with everybody in the show notes. But what I'd like to transition into now is the 4 questions that I ask everybody who is a guest on the show. So what does visibility mean to you and why?
Yeah, so visibility, it sort of goes back to what we've talked about is being understood. And I know it's repetitive, but it's really that fundamental having people. It means that because then somebody gets me. And then I think then life is different, that then I don't have to explain. That's where it lands.
I love that. What are you doing to be visible?
Yeah, so I think it's goes back to what we've been talking about is to create that conversation, create that narrative, and also to commit to having just a few people. I'm not looking for a big village, but I'm just getting a few people to be my advocates and be my friends in this walk. So it's that conversation, but try not to overwhelm people. I think that's where I have run into trouble, where it's like, oh, let me tell you about it. And they're like, oh, that's too much. And then, I get it. So it's creating a story, but doing it short and sweet and in tangible moments. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're doing the right thing though, with even using like computer technology and helping people understand, what they're dealing with day to day may not be perfect for them either. And then how it impacts you in a whole different way that they just need to understand a bit more about. And I think stories are such a great way to teach people anyway. So hopefully you can keep using those and they'll start to understand what your world is like now. Okay. What is the best career or leadership advice you've ever received?
Yeah. I think this was taught to me early on when I got out of vet school. It was the mindset that you always admit when you don't know the answer. And I can say that in my early years of looking at horses' mouths when I didn't know what I was seeing, and I told clients that, and I can't tell you the credibility that I gained from that. That I was like, I'm going to research her. It's not that I don't know it and I'm not going to pursue it, but I need to get back to you about it. And it was a game changer for me. And so I feel like it's okay not to have all the answers.
I love that so much because I struggled with asking for help. So I try to teach people now it's okay, right? It's actually a sign of strength. And I love that you saw that it gave you respect from your clients, right? Because nobody can know everything, right? We have to do our best. And in the video, what I loved is you're like, sometimes I'm in a horse's mouth and I'm trying to feel because I learned by feeling what the mouth is supposed to feel like, right? Versus where it is. And I don't think that people use other ways to get to information, right? Sometimes if I can't see it, it's not true. And for you learn different ways. You're leveraging different options. And I think that's another way for people to start to, learn about how to be a different leader, for example, or how to show up differently, and asking for help and saying you don't know the ansers. Perfectly fine. Right. That's why you have a team. That's what I always say. You have a team for a reason, people.
Right. Ask them.
Let's use them.
And empower them. And then they're like, oh, I got the answer. And the mentor that taught me, the first day I went to him, he said, I'm not going to, I can think maybe it was the first 2 days of training. He said, you will not be able to look in the horse's mouth. You need to do it all by feel and tell me what's going on in there. So he was determined to teach me that was my left hand was a very valuable resource, and it became that for me, for sure. Yeah.
Wow. That's so incredible. Okay. So last question. What is a book that you've read recently that you would recommend? Yeah.
And I want to clarify before I say the title that I'm not all in one sort of lane of life, but I have to say, because I read mysteries and other light things, and but the book Bittersweet by Susan Cain is, I think it resonated with me for a couple of reasons. I think that we are in a world, it sort of captures part of our conversation today, that we, as we want to have people with invisible illnesses be vulnerable enough to share, then there needs to be a place where people that I know we get a lot of mileage out of the sort of narrative of glass half empty or glass half full, and you need to look at life as there's always a positive thing, and these are gifts. Well, MECFS is not a gift to me. I've learned a lot, and it's my life, and I've embraced it. But so in Susan Cain's Bittersweet, I think she allows that middle place where, and also has a great chapter about leadership, and that showing that vulnerability and showing the sort of tough things that people are dealing with, you get people to lean into you rather than thinking that you're weak. Mm-hmm. And so it just speaks to that. So it speaks to that we don't have to be half empty or half full. It's constantly going up and down, and it's okay not to be okay, as they say. But she does it in a much more beautiful way. And so that's the book that I recommend.
Awesome. Well, I have not heard of that, so I'm adding it to my list. I think, I loved what you said about the vulnerability angle too. I think there is, maybe before Brene Brown talked about vulnerability all the time, I don't think people really thought about that as something that they could do, and leaders shied away from it, right? They didn't want to show that they didn't have all the answers and they didn't have it all together all the time. And to me, I think there's a relatability to that, right? That team members can see you're not perfect, that you don't have all the answers, that there's more opportunity for collaboration and helping each other figure out the problems and solve them together, which I think is a much better way in the end of the day. So, well, I loved our conversation today. I love all the things that we talked about. Is there anything else you want to share that we didn't get into?
No, I've really greatly appreciate the opportunity, as I said, to put a little twist on the visibility factor here today. And I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
Yes. Well, it was lovely to have you. And I just feel like I hope the audience has learned a lot more about these illnesses and what they can be like. I feel like our conversation was really great that we had on the phone, because it reinforced some things that I probably knew from some of the things my clients had said. And I think it's just a conversation we need to be having more of. So I'm thrilled that you were here and could share. I look forward to when your book comes out, and maybe when people can see you speak,
Me too.
Which I know is a journey, having been on it, and I'm on my second one now. So when it's ready, it will be ready. And that's the important thing. So, all right, everybody, thanks so much for joining today on the Visibility Factor podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks so much for listening to the Visibility Factor podcast. Remember that visibility starts with small steps that are intentional and consistent each day. Be bold, be visible, be the leader you were meant to be. Find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, which are highlighted in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Visibility Factor podcast.